I'd firstly like to welcome all of you to Power to the People webinar. My name is Maximilian Fries. I am the Managing Director of Europe Calling. It is my pleasure to moderate this evening together with Sima Sida from European Alternatives. You'll hear more about her later. We'll keep it short at the beginning so that we have plenty of time for questions and discussions. As always, you can ask your questions and rate each other's questions. Today we are using Slido for this purpose. You will see the link in the chat and on the slide. Feel free to ask your questions there and rate the questions of the others. Because with over 1,300 people from all over Europe, this won't work without your help. And you can also select the language in which you want to pose your questions so we can keep this apart. And please do add your name so I don't always have to say anonymous user. And as always, this webinar will be recorded and then uploaded to YouTube. Please keep that in mind. The link for posing your questions will now be in the chat. And let me say a few words about this evening's topic, climate fatigue. Well, the idea for this topic came from the conversations in the participating groups, and many of us shared how we ourselves and others increasingly feel exhausted and powerless in the face of the combined and pretty existential climate and species crisis. And that is why today and next week we want to come together to have a discussion about how we can translate powerlessness into meaningful change and personal actions. And it is vital for us in this format to learn from each other and to give strength to our own activities. And that's what Power to the People does. It allows for working across borders in a transnational space. And I now would like to show you a slide for you to see how this is going to be set up. You can see on the left-hand side what we're going to do. We're going to start with 2 keynotes by Caroline Hickman and Sven Hillenkamp as an introduction. After that, we'll have a round of spotlights by people from different parts of the movement who will report to us what they're doing and what their stance is on climate fatigue. After that, we'll have a bit of time for some questions and answers. But we'll only have 20 minutes because next week, as you can see here on the right-hand side, we'll meet again at the same time in order to get together in smaller breakout rooms. And that's when we'll want to hear from you. That's when we'll want you to have discussions across borders to discuss what you took or what was important to you about today's event and what you wish to share. It's the second time that we proceed in this form, and we're very pleased that you've decided to join us this evening. That would be it for my introduction, and I'd now like to give the floor to Caroline Hickman, our first keynote speaker. She is specialized in climate psychology, École, fear, and she's a movement researcher and an author as to the subject, and also a university lecturer. Without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Caroline. Thank you very much for being here this evening.
Thank you. I'll share my screen with you. I hadn't put the translations on, so I was trying to figure it out as we went. So hopefully that's clear. So thank you for asking me to join you. I'm going to talk about climate anxiety from a climate psychology perspective. And there will be some emphasis on the way it's affecting younger people, children and younger people, but not exclusively. I want to start by saying, if you're feeling climate anxiety, if you're feeling climate distress in relation to climate change, the biodiversity crisis, you're only feeling this because you care. And so the psychological perspective that I'm presenting to you today is that you should feel proud that you care. This is not a pathology. It's not a mental health problem. This is not something that we should be saying there is something wrong with you. In fact, I would worry about people that were not feeling this in relation to what's going on in the world. We think about mental health in terms of our capacity to respond to external reality And external reality tells us things are getting worse. Therefore, these emotional responses are healthy. We do, however, have to pay attention to navigating this and the suffering that people feel. When this comes to young people in particular, there's also a moral injury on the top of this. Young people expect to inherit a world, ideally to move into a world where people are taking care of the world that they're inheriting. And this is so often not the case today. So this moral injury and distress is caused by other people not acting with integrity, with care, with honor, with love. So it's not just climate change itself that causes climate anxiety. It's the fact that other people, particularly older people, people in power, governments, oil companies, don't seem to care. That is what's causing some of the worst distress. A 19-year-old said to me, he said, "Tell me how to live in a world that doesn't care about the future of young people." A young woman in the United States said to me, she said, "I wish I was mad, because if I was mad, my madness, my fear about climate change would be part of my madness. And it would be easier to deal with that than to deal with climate anxiety." So the point I'm trying to make at the start here is that this is a relational problem. We don't want to over individualize it. It is in connection to the way other people are acting or not acting. And I'm going to say it again, and I promised I tried to not bore you with this. If you feel distress, it's because you care. You should be proud that you care. It shows you have a moral conscience. The knowledge about climate change is well known, and we have short-term and long-term impact psychologically. The short-term impact is shock, stress, extreme events, but there's also the long-term psychological impact. And it can also be direct and indirect. So you don't have to be facing smoke, wildfires, flooding to feel the impact psychologically. Of course, you're going to have the immediate physical impact, but it's this longer term psychological impact that I want to emphasize, because you don't have to be on the front line of climate change to be feeling the impact of this. Here we would be talking about climate anxiety, vicarious trauma, reading about it, hearing about it, empathizing, caring about what's happening to other people all over the world. There's pre-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress and complicated grief. The reason it's complicated for us is because we feel helpless, we feel powerless, we feel enraged, and we're causing this, and we can feel powerless within this. So it's complicated. We can't just have straightforward grief. Paul Hoggart, who established the Climate Psychology Alliance, I think gave us some really important message here. We are living in this time when tragedy, which is without precedent, is unfolding in front of our eyes. And we're witnessing catastrophic rates of species extinction, biodiversity loss. It's those words, when we try to think about this psychologically, we are living in this and we are witnessing it. It's so hard to both live within something and observe it and understand it all simultaneously. Timothy Morton, the philosopher, calls it a hyperobject. It's too big to see all at once, which also means it's too big to understand all at once. Therefore, it makes complete sense that half the time we don't know how to feel. And it is an unprecedented emergent mental health crisis. And that can be an overused term, but I mean it this time, which means I've been studying this for over 10 years in clinical practice and in research. I'm only just beginning to understand this. So we need to have the humility and the hubris to not use existing mental health models which pathologize and say there's a problem with the individual. I no longer work just with individuals in my clinical practice. I work with the people and the planet. We have to have a planetary framework for understanding this distress. I'm sure you know this, but this shows a scale of some of the threats, the multiple threats we're facing. I'm not minimizing COVID at all, and recession, and economic pressure. But climate change, biodiversity collapse, wave after wave. We're all swimming in this anxious sea at the moment. Of course, this would affect us. I would go so far now as to say, I think everyone on the planet has some eco-anxiety, but it can be felt to a smaller or a greater extent. And some people have very good defenses around this, and other people do not. Speth is famous for saying, we can deal with the climate crisis with technology, with 30 years science. But I was wrong, he said. Top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with that, we need spiritual and cultural transformation. It's not science alone. It's science with psychology, with law, with art, with stories, with understanding that we need, this integrated understanding. Humor is a mature defense that can help us with some of the distress. It can be valuable to us. We need to use it wisely, but it can help reduce the terror that we can feel as we start to look at what's happening. She's saying, can you help me move these from the fiction to the non-fiction section? Stories about this multiple threats have been around for many years. They are a way of understanding. So this eco-anxiety is an emotionally, mentally healthy response. It's relational. We need to not suppress it. We don't want to push it away. The first thing I say to everybody in clinical practice is, I promise you, I'm not going to try and get rid of your eco-anxiety. It's the last thing I would do because it's healthy. I do want to help you navigate it so that you don't have to push it down and make it too small or be completely overwhelmed with it. We need to be in a relationship with it where it comes and goes, but we feel okay about not being okay. All of these emotions are part of eco-anxiety. It starts with anxiety, but it equally then quickly develops into all these other feelings: grief, solastalgia, which is love of place, hope and hopelessness. We don't want to just focus on what are thought of as positive feelings. Hopelessness is crucial here. Anger, blame, frustration, guilt, shame, grief, rage, fantasies of rescue, apocalyptic fantasies. There's a difference with the fantasy. We need to extend our psyche to be able to touch the edges of this if we're going to discover what this is. And our defenses and our despair. The important thing psychologically is not get over-attached to any one of these emotions. So this is where I'm talking about the need for both external activism. Of course, we need to take external action, but this is internal activism, coming to terms with this range of emotional responses and making a place for all of them. Don't deny any of them because they all have their place. We need this emotional biodiversity. My friend who's an ecologist laughs at me and says it's not quite right, but it's the best I can do at the moment. I'm working on this. We need to have this emotional range in the same way as we need external ecological biodiversity. We need this internal emotional biodiversity as well. There are age differences in some of the research, which is important to us. We don't fully understand this yet. The younger age groups, 61% were concerned. This is 2020 research. 16 to 24, 61% were very concerned. And then it goes up again over 65s, but it drops in midlife. We don't fully understand why. Maybe because at midlife we're juggling so many different pressures and stresses. But this is important when we need to think about communicating about this and the psychology of navigating it. There can be age differences, generational differences, different amounts of grief or guilt or shame. If we leave young people to feel the guilt and the weight of responsibility, we are doing them a double disservice emotionally. So I just want to give you a few figures and then I'm going to stop because I've probably used up enough time. So that's the psychological framing that I'm introducing. I've been researching this for many years, 10 years with children all over the world. But what we didn't have until a couple of years ago was significant numbers. And this was research done with colleagues where we talked with 10,000 children, young people, 16 to 25. It was a survey. Australia, Brazil, Finland, France, India, Nigeria, Philippines, Portugal, UK, US. We are extending this to the other countries. 45% reported negative impact on daily functioning. So when we're thinking about climate anxiety, we need to think about the way this distress impacts on normal life, ordinary life, spending time in nature, playing, having fun, relationships. And I want to show you the difference in some of these countries. Look at the dark blue line. France, for example, 35% impact on daily living. India, Philippines, 74%. Huge impact on daily life. Not surprising, is it? UK, only 28%. Finland, 31%. So we can see, depending on where you are in relation to the immediate physical impact, there'll be a difference in the way it affects your life. This is the difference, but I want to show you some other interesting figures which show where we are very aligned. This is an emotional worldwide stress. These are the worldwide figures: 67% sad, 67% afraid, 62% anxious. This is quite well known. This is quite well mapped. So this is the emotional. That was the physical impact. This is the emotional impact. But let me show you the cognitive impact, because this is what I think holds some clues to understanding. 55% worldwide, 53% UK think they won't have access to the same opportunities their parents had. So being a child in the UK does not protect you from this cognitive impact, the thinking about your future. Over half think their family security will be threatened. Now, when we think about security, it's often personal security. 52% worldwide, lower, of course, UK, 39%, because less direct impact at the moment. But look at this. 8 out of 10, 83% worldwide, 80% UK, 92% Philippines, think that people have failed to take care of the planet. So again, we have this alignment, this similarity in cognitive thinking impact, which also will connect us with guilt, with responsibility, with empathy, with relationship to climate anxiety. 3/4 or more think the future is frightening. 75% worldwide, 73% UK. You're not protected from that fear by living in the UK. Of course, it's going to be worse in the Philippines, 92. It's shocking. Over half think humanity is doomed. 56% worldwide, 51% UK. Do you see what I mean about you're not protected? So we cannot, and I'm sure nobody here would do this, but we cannot say, well, we will be okay here. This is a planetary crisis in terms of physical action, but also psychological harm. We cannot protect ourselves psychologically or physically by looking away from what's happening elsewhere in the world. A couple more things and then I'll be quiet. All of that, I think, is awful. As a psychotherapist, I spend a lot of time every day listening to people's distress. This is the statistic I think we should do more about immediately. And I think that's what webinars like this are about. 48% of children and young people reported they were dismissed or ignored by other people when they tried to talk about climate change. We might not be able to stop climate change today, but we can stop this happening today. 48% UK and worldwide were shut down, told to be quiet when they tried to talk about climate change. That's not okay. We then linked it to beliefs about governments, this relationship with powerful others. 65%, this is the UK figures, 65% felt governments were failing young people. 28% thought government could be trusted. You see what I mean about that relational fracturing, that breakdown in trust and relationship? It's really important. This is the group of researchers. So I'm linking now climate anxiety to a human rights issue. There's an intersection between human rights, climate change, and climate anxiety, and leaving vulnerable young people, any people, to be fair, to climate anxiety and this moral injury could be argued to be cruel, inhuman, degrading, and torture. It's a human rights issue, not siloed into mental health. If we address this in this way and frame it in this way, using this climate trauma lens, there is this possibility, I've got to skip because I need to be quiet, to talk about reframing, because I need to leave you with something slightly more hopeful. Reframing eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, and eco-empathy, eco-compassion, courage, community, connection, belonging, meaning, care, and aliveness. So not suppressing it, but reframing it, understanding it, having the courage to step towards it. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wow. Vielen, vielen Dank. Das war richtig powerful.
Wow, thank you so much. That was really powerful. Well, sometimes, you know, emotional biodiversity, this is something that you won't forget. Thank you very much. You brought up these concepts. That was great. So that's a great basis to work with. So what could that cause? What can that create? And we have an expert here to talk about just that. Sven Hillenkamp, a sociologist, author, and an analyst of the climate protest movement with a history in direct action movements. And also he is part of that movement, as he says himself. He has written, as an editor, essays for the Zeit journal, the newspaper, and he has a critical look onto climate movements. So looking at the action they take, this is something that he takes a closer look at. Sven, you have the floor. Glad to have you. Thank you, Maximilian. Thanks, everybody. I'm so happy to be sharing my thoughts with you tonight. Indeed, I'm an author, German-speaking author and live in Sweden, Stockholm. And you asked me to introduce myself with a few words. So between the age of 18 and 23, I was a member of a very radical group, various movements, the militant anti-fascism group. We had various groups in which we fought against capitalist prestigious objects. Well, sadly, unfortunately, and very ironically, also against new railway tracks being built in Germany. So that is something I no longer agree with today. I was part of an autonomous feminist men's group and others. But then, growing older, at about 23, I left these groups because, you know, I doubted them or there was criticism voiced. Then very smoothly, I became a movement analyst, also to have the analytical toolbox that it takes to look back at my own activist past. I became an editor of the Journal for Socialist Movements, and researchers, sociologists are trying to look into why some movements fail or become marginalized by their own actions, and why is it that other movements go a very different route and they actually manage to make a difference in society and get people on the streets. And I've also worked partly as a journalist. You might know the Zeit, the weekly paper. I lived in Berlin, but then I started working as an author, and now I live in Stockholm. And via Greta, unsurprisingly, I got in touch with the climate movement. So on the one hand, I'm a participant. I wear two hats here, and also a critical observer. And in being that, I hope to be able to contribute to avoid making the mistakes that were made in the past. And in that way, my contribution and my support might seem paradoxical. You know, on the one hand, I support critical voices, or I support them via critical voices as well. This is something I will be doing tonight. So what's the dilemma or the issue? Well, how can you reach out to those who are just not reachable? Those who haven't opened their eyes and ears yet? They could not yet be reached, and based on their ideologist ideas or principles, are very hard to reach. And I'm not talking about those groups who are furthest away in the sense of the extreme right, of religious groups. No, I'm talking about the flexible middle between them. So that might be 10 to 20% of people in our Western societies. Social Democrats, for example, like Olof Palme, the Social Democrat in Sweden, or Helmut Schmidt, German Social Democrat, or people who made Barack Obama listen to them. You know, they might vote for a more conservative party, but then they are happy to turn to the Democrats or the liberal side. So I'm talking about those 10 to 20% in our society. Now, looking at the question, where are we today and what path are we taking? Now, I think we've closed the first phase, that is a commitment, getting active. It's sort of a downhill phase, going downhill continuously. That is the very phase in which a new issue, a new problem becomes visible and people become aware of that, public becomes aware of that. And we're talking about a major transition, a change of route, change of direction. So this phase, I think, has been closed with great success. And very quickly, we managed to reach the so-called low-hanging fruits, that is, people who are willing to listen to what people have to say, who protest, and that they have an open mind, an open ear for anything that's social protest.
Ensuite, la deuxième phase, qui est bien différente.
And that's a different can of worms
Il s'agit de personnes difficiles à atteindre d'un point de vue.
They have ideological hurdles or social barriers, and that is a major difference. So, and also we've seen a massive counter-activism. So whenever a new issue is discussed in the public, it's not yet taken over by ideologists, like large parts of society, industry. The social conservatives were quite surprised because, you know, climate or climate change became a neutral topic, and then we saw the backlash. We're in the middle of that phase, and there's a third reason for that, because now it's about practical implementation, no more combustion engines, for example, or phasing out fossil fuels, coal, natural oil and gas. So this is where it's going to hurt. So we're moving upwards, no longer downhill. It's no longer going to be a roll or a downhill or a walk in the park. Now it's going to get difficult. It's going to get hard work. And that's important to keep in mind, because it's very important for today's issue, you know, looking into the psychological attitude or into the psychology of everybody concerned and everybody participating. As soon as it gets difficult, it gets harder, well, we simply have to realize that we're in that uphill phase. That's what I call it. It's not that we're doing things wrong or that we're going to fail in our battle. The battle has only just started, and the battle is a battle. You know, we have very strong adversaries, and we're in the middle of that fight. And it'd be a very good idea not to keep thinking, oh, it's our fault that we're in that situation. We've done things wrong. Or to think that we're powerless, that we're helpless. Let's not think that, because it's going to get harder for some time. It's not because those who are committed to the cause are doing things wrong. It's just the nature of things, the nature of the situation, and we have more counter-activists mobilizing forces. So speaking of desperation, I was listening to Caroline, people feeling powerless or helplessness, and this is actually our issue tonight. There's one point I should like to criticize here. Traumatic situations become traumatizing once you feel you're helpless in face of them. And actually, looking at this feeling of helplessness and powerlessness, it's pretty much homemade. You have achieved so much in only a couple of years. You've changed the programming of political parties. They all carry out, or did they announce a different message? Looking at European political parties, you've changed anything that's published in the media. You've changed the path researchers are taking. And there have been court decisions as well. And looking at reducing emissions, you have greatly contributed to that. hundreds of millions of people depend on that, depend on us reducing emissions. That's what you've achieved, but you keep telling yourselves, oh, we failed, we failed. You tell yourself that actually we haven't made a difference. That's what I hear pretty much everywhere. That's what I would like to warn against, because this creates a feeling of powerlessness. It makes you feel helpless. So it's not surprising that people feel helpless, or it's not surprising perhaps that people feel they don't make a difference. And people might ask themselves, why do they now leave the movements? Why do they give up? Well, it's because they have this idea of being powerless, being helpless. But looking into things as an analyst of movements, looking at your movements, you have managed, you have achieved more, much more ever since the 1980s. And people have in their fight against slavery, for example, or xenophobia, or the feminist movement, starting with the very first movements, the suffragettes, or rape in a marriage being banned, or what the workers, the laborers movement achieved over very large time spans might not have been so much. And when we look at what you achieved, it's because you have less time, you've had less time. And the clock's ticking in terms of climate change and ecology and biodiversity. It might be true in scientific terms, but it's killing your commitment. And stop measuring yourself against that, because then you feel a failure all the time. You feel like you're a loser, and you're not. Look at your political success. And I assure you that you will no longer feel as helpless and powerless. And you can be proud of yourselves. Be proud. And trust yourselves to continue to make a difference. It takes confidence. So a number of factors, to continue with that, were a bit of a hindrance to how far we can reach out as activists. Well, 10 or 15 minutes as an input of what we need to change. It's a bit difficult to get it all together in that time span. Well, I'm trying sort of to touch upon the 5 major factors. So on the one hand, we need to change things within our activist movements, but also going beyond activism, move beyond the movement is actually what I'd say, what I'd call it. We need a new platform at the end of the day. So the big 5. So the first great barrier is within the protest movement. Those movements only manage to convince a small number of people in society, but the higher hanging fruit, as soon as there's some demonstration, a protest, people chanting songs or shouting out things and waving flags, they will close the window, they shut their eyes and ears. They don't want to hear about protest. That's where you lose them. So let's look at the specific forms. Disruptive protest, Letzte Generation, Just Stop Oil, and other groups. So in Germany, something I can touch upon. There was a study published that confirms what we've been afraid of. It causes backlash, this kind of disruptive behavior. So looking at what happened in Berlin, the referendum to become climate neutral by 2030. Well, let's say it wasn't only in Berlin, but in Germany all over that people no longer support action to stop climate change as much as they did before. The indirect agenda setting by the media, this is not the effect that we've seen. But there's another aspect that's even more critical. 47% of those who voted against in the referendum for climate neutrality, they said that they vote against this very tangible, this very specific climate policies because they are against those people who go for radical action, like actually block the streets, chain themselves somewhere and just and cause havoc. So that's what people say. We want to teach them a lesson by voting against. That's a very backlash. That's negative consequences that we're talking about here. But it's not just that side of the protest that should be seen with critical eyes. Just Stop Oil and Letzte Generation, looking at the content they're conveying, a very moderate But what's happening in the radical part of the climate movement is radicalization. So the two are intertwined. In the more liberal climate movement, we've seen a more battle-like attitude, also bringing, for example, gender issues and Israel-Palestina, for example, Palestine, for example. So there's a whole host of issues coming in, a whole host of groups, and those, the group of people who can freely say, yes, we agree on all the issues, this number is in decline. It's not about policy, it's about science. That's what they said in Stockholm at some point, because the list of all the add-on topics has become so long now. The radical left and the Vocus profile has been linked to that. And I'm not really criticizing this, but if these are big organizations, big groups, and if it seems uniform, or everything seems vegan, queer, feminist, anti-colonial, etc. It seems to be a mix. It seems to be sort of a group that doesn't set any differences or any separations. So this is something that has contributed to this backlash. So the legal parts of groups, however, they are not as moderate in their content. So looking at the culture of a movement, this also creates a major barrier, and I don't think people are aware of that. Every culture has its subcultures, and there's a special kind of behavior that people within the movement think is normal, perfectly normal, because you applaud like this, raising your hands, sensory overload people, or you might, dance a little dance to relax during breaks, or when we went into the streets in Berlin, a large number of people went barefoot and carried out yoga exercises. So things or behaviors that are totally normal, perfectly normal within the movements, these might create barriers culturally that people cannot overcome, not just for social democrats, but for other political groups or fields. So it's like a space shuttle. The movement has moved away from the planet Earth. It's undergone its own development. You can judge it a good thing or a bad thing. It's not about judging here. It's not about saying that was okay. It was not. People who in the 70s might not have been very different from the others in society. Today, it's a whole different group. The second major barrier. Sven, I'd like to stop her here because Reintke needs to go. I'd like to have Tebe in, so they have 3 minutes. We're very interested in hearing what you have to say, but let's give Tebe a chance. Apologies to Sema. I'll bring Carrie in before she needs to leave so she can provide her spotlight. And then we continue with Sven.
I'm sorry, I have to go.
We are sorry, Terry. So good to have you. Terry Reintke, Greens MEP, and group chair. Wow, here we go.
Maybe I'm also an interesting interlude, because actually I think some of the considerations that I wanted to share with you are, well, maybe not similar, but at least I think interact with what Sven has just been saying. And the first one is indeed reflecting a little bit about what happened in the last years. Maybe just to say about myself, I started being active in green politics, climate politics around 20 years ago, where there were already sort of also obviously climate ecological movements, but nothing in the scale of what we saw in the last years. And reflecting on, because I have been in the European Parliament since 2014, I really want to second what Sven has been saying, because there was this very big mobilization, and suddenly things were possible. A window of opportunity kind of opened, and suddenly political majorities were possible that we had never dreamed about in the European Parliament and also in other places of power beforehand. And I have the feeling, and that is rightly so and very understandably, a lot of people thought, okay, now the penny has dropped, now people understood, and now there is going to be a linear sort of development towards people understanding more and more how urgent it is to act on climate change, to act on biodiversity loss, and we move from there. Whereas, well, and maybe we are not moving fast enough, but at least we are moving into the right direction. And I think when you look at how political discourses develop, and I'm saying this now a little bit as a granny who has been around for a little bit longer, this is not how we see the development also of this debate. Because when I look at the majorities and the political space that we have, for example, for issues around climate change, to find majorities on very concrete measures, to implement the changes that we had actually agreed on with a very, very big majority, we see that indeed we are now going through a backlash moment. And I'm saying this fully understanding that actually the things that we are trying to do right now are still very much, I mean, I'm not saying that they're not very impactful and that they really change people's lives, but compared to the things that we will have to do in 10 years, in 15 years, they are still quite simple political challenges. But still, we are right now in a situation where we are not to the same degree winning majorities anymore, where we are experiencing indeed a counter mobilization. And we have that in the European Parliament with the Green Deal, where you probably heard recently the nature restoration law, which is now, I think, really the crucial point where we will see whether the majority is going to move to the right and basically, well, make it impossible to move ahead with further climate legislation, at least in this very moment. So for me, the question is, first of all, how do we adjust the strategy that we have, the political strategy, in order to counter this backlash? Because I think that this is something that, at least in the political reality, we haven't dealt with to the same extent over the past years. And secondly, how do we find new strategies of mobilization so that we get out of a defensive discourse and back into looking forward what we need to do? And obviously, as we are speaking about the psychological impacts tonight, I wanted to look a little bit how for the movement, but also I think for politicians that really care about climate actions, what are points where I think maybe we have to become better, or we have to think about when we look at the situation that we are in right now. And the first one, and this is something that also Sven and Caroline hinted towards, is, and I believe it is important, even though it might seem cynical sometimes, to celebrate the victories that we have had. I sometimes have the feeling, because the problem is so big, and that we feel that all the steps that we are taking are far too small and not moving fast enough. Whereas I think psychologically, it is very important to sometimes sit back and say, we have achieved something and we are happy about that, and we take strength from this to take the next step. This is the first very important thing that I think, as politicians, but especially people, activists and movements, we have to try to figure out and to really find spaces and places where we can do that. The second one, and this is going a little bit also what already was mentioned, learning to deal with strategic disagreements on where we have to go next. Because I think there was a massive mobilization where it was about making noise, putting this problem on the agenda, making it something that is as urgent as it is. But now we are in a moment where I think also within the movement, there is a far bigger variety of what strategic pathways we can take. And for me, this is something that is very often seen within movements as something difficult, something dangerous. And I think that it would be very important between politicians, between activists, between different actors in this, to find places where maybe also sometimes disagreements, differences can exist. We can live with them, but we can still sort of see strategically how we still move into the same direction together. And this leads to my third point, and this is something where I maybe also feel we still have to work on looking ahead, and that is finding differentiated roles. Because I'm fully aware that, I come from an activist background, now I'm a politician, I can take decisions, how we can better reflect on these different roles, also be okay with it, that there are spaces in which we can act, and there are also spaces in which we might not be able to act, and to not take frustration from this. The fourth point I wanted to make, and I say this in every context that I'm speaking about being frustrated, or also having maybe issues that are related to mental health, despite the fact that we have no time to lose and that we have to act. It is important for you individually, and even for me as a politician, but especially for activists, to take breaks and to also know that there are moments where maybe the pace is going to calm down a little bit, and that this is something that is considered to be okay. Because I have seen far too many people that on the one hand feel this very strong anxiety, and on the other hand are basically overwhelming themselves trying to react to it. So I really believe taking also moments of a sort of break moments is absolutely important. And then the last point, and this is relating to what Caroline was saying, not individualizing the trauma and the difficulties and the challenges that people are facing. So to create a space to address the anxieties without making it the center of the debate. So to sort of have places to go, but not to only speak about that and only, you know, focus around that. I think that this is something that is a very, very challenging thing to do, but I believe that it will be important so that we can get the energy back to have these new strategies, but also to now get into a defense line in the struggles where we are now in a more difficult position than maybe we were a couple of years ago. And maybe I'm going to end here. I'm very much looking forward to also getting reports from the rest of Sven's input, but then also what the others are going to say, because I believe, despite the fact that we are now in a more difficult position that maybe we were 5-6 years ago, I'm very convinced that we can also turn this around again, and that maybe in 2-3 years we will be in a much more active position again, and then to make possible to have majorities to move faster than maybe we are able to do now, and to also look at this in a more long-term perspective. Thank you very much.
Terry, vielen, vielen Dank. Das war ganz super und danke, dass du dir die Zeit genommen hast und sogar ein bisschen überzogen hast. Also länger als du da sein konntest. Ich gebe dann direkt wieder an Sven zurück, bevor wir in die anderen Spotlights gehen, weil Sven, du warst noch nicht fertig. Und ich glaube, das hat ja auch sehr gut viele Anknüpfungspunkte gegeben, da einfach weiterzumachen. Und ich will nur kurz sagen, wir haben ja das Fragentool offen.
Okay, let's hand back to Sven. There were a lot of questions.
Viele Leute, die sagen, wie viel ihnen das jetzt schon bedeutet.
And many people said that, yeah, it's very interesting to hear that, and it helps them to live with what they experience, also emotionally, and it helps them to carry on their work. Well, thank you very much. Sorry, it takes a bit longer. If you just use buzzwords, it's very abstract. You really need to get into it a little more deeply. I'll try to speed up, but at the same time, I just want to make sure that everybody can follow, because this is about very specific things. So the next major barrier, talking about the big five here, leading to unnecessary backlash, and to the fact that fewer people roll up their sleeves and get active. It has to do with values and words. What are the values you use, and which words or terms do you use for your commitment, for your getting active? So which values do you need to pronounce, or words do you need to say that'll open doors or that'll lead to doors being shut in your face? So climate change is often linked to very leftist values, power to the people. That's what our event is called. No conservative or a liberal member of Congress or any group would call them power to the people. This sounds very leftist, radical-ish. So like Black Panther. So this is a bit of an issue. You know, people are automatically associating values. When you talk about system change, so when looking at climate justice and climate justice movement, most people think, well, justice, that's something that's true for everybody. Who doesn't want the world to become a juster place, a fairer place? But that's not what other milieus, other strata will say. So you won't be able to reach out to them. I don't think the attitude is wrong at all, but part of the group, part of the movement should be able to work with things like prosperity, where people feel at home, Heimat, for example. This is what it takes to avoid backlash or to reduce backlash. And that way it might help you, connect with other or reach out to other milieus, other groups in society. In 2011, just to give you an example, David Cameron at the Conservative Party's meeting, he explained why his party should support gay marriage. And he said, this is not only about equality. So equality, this is a leftist value, and liberals and conservatives would never have been won over by that. But David Cameron said, we want people to pledge a vow for one another. We want liaison, we want connection, we want commitment. And that is why I now support gay marriage for homosexuals and lesbians. Not in spite I'm a conservative, but because I'm a conservative. That's what David Cameron said. And this way of building a bridge across values and words, of terms, has helped him. So they did not just count on equality, but they said, look, we want to take care of it. If one of us gets ill, or one of us should pass away, what about the other one? We want to get married, we want a family, we want love, commitment. And this opened the door into the conservative milieu in politics. And I think it's worth its while to just listen very carefully. What words do we use? What values do we promote? So there are groups that use totally different normative concepts and do not automatically exclude large parts of the population beforehand. Well, another issue is the problems that are being talked about. People say, oh, climate, everybody's talking about it, the destruction of nature, the decay of nature. They feel it's denying or not talking about problems that to them are more important. It's a distraction, for example, mass immigration. That's what they're worried about. And that people say, look, why don't we talk about that? Why do you talk about the climate all the time? So in Sweden, we had elections and people sort of had to decide between the climate change issue and immigration issues. It was quite predictable. They went all for immigration issues, so the Conservatives won. And they're tolerated by the extremist right. And that's something that should not happen. That should be avoided. So to open up for any climate issues does not mean that you're putting anything else under the carpet or you're not taking seriously any other problems. Because then you lose people. People will think, oh, they don't take my problems seriously. And you'll find it really hard to get in touch with them again, because for the left side in politics, talking about migration, immigration is a very dodgy issue. It's very sensitive because immediately you risk being called a right extremist or fascist or whatever. And obviously you've got to keep an eye on the economic situation, etc. So, but there's no way around it. The others cry immigration, the others say climate. Going against one another, fighting each other, is not going to work. You will need inclusive language and inclusive problems. Well, inclusive solutions, I can't say much about that. But just one last point. We discuss about different forms of protest. And as I said, all of forms of protest, they make one mistake, is their forms of protest. The left forgets that the most effective way of carrying out actions is somebody who is very charismatic. Without Greta, we'd never have seen what we've seen between 18 and 2019, a democratic election campaign like Obama carried out. You know, Obama was an important figure, a pioneering figure, and you need that, just like people used Mahatma Gandhi at the time. You don't need to be a vegan, a cyclist, and car hater feeling a better person and be the model, the example of an ecologist. No, these need to be normal people, people say like, oh, I'm taking a train, so they're delayed again, or the train's cancelled. It can be a nuisance, you know. So why not talk about it?
Thank you so much, Sven. This has been a really interesting speech and lots of interesting ideas that you've mentioned. I think it's really important, especially to think about how we can engage different demographics in society, people with different political views, and especially this idea of the normal person, who it is and how we engage them. So thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today. Really sorry to have to stop you, but we've got to move on now to the next section of this event. So just as a quick introduction, I'm Seema Saida. I work with Another Europe is Possible and European Alternatives, part of the Power to the People group, both organizations that work for democracy, culture and politics beyond the nation state. I myself have actually been involved in some climate activism, especially in 2018 and 2019 with the social movement group Momentum in the UK, where I was involved with organizing occupations of Barclays banks in order to highlight the systemic nature of the climate crisis and how it's being caused by the fossil fuel industry. And I was trying to use the platform that we gained from these occupations to highlight colonialism and the colonial the legacy that colonialism has had on climate change. As someone with a background coming from Bangladesh, one of the countries most affected by the climate crisis. Now, so it's very interesting to me to hear about all of these different strategies. And since 2019, I've felt a lot of despair and hopelessness, and I've had less activism with the climate movement. So it's really great to be here, to be inspired by others who are talking about this sense of anxiety and despair and how we can overcome it. So without further ado, I'll move forward to the spotlights. We have some great speakers here who are going to share some different perspectives for a few minutes. They'll talk about their personal backgrounds and roles, and they'll share their feelings and experiences towards the climate crisis and how they deal with them. So first up is Matteo Innocenti. Matteo is a psychiatrist and president of the Italian Climate Change Anxiety Association. Over to you, Matteo.
Grazie a tutti, buonasera, sono Matteo Innocenti, sono uno psichiatra e psicoterapeuta.
Hello everyone, my name is Matteo Innocenti. I founded the Italian association that is in charge of anxiety towards climate change. Our goal is that of helping everyone who suffers from eco-anxiety and climate anxiety. I will just share my screen with you right now. We help people who are suffering from a psychological level when it comes to climate change. And we also carry out research. As Professor Hickman said at the start, I wanted to start with our model. We start with eco-anxiety, that is what we analyze. And we take a step back. We don't frame it as a disease or as a pathology, but we see it as an emotion that is supposed to help us take a step forward. Indeed, emotion comes from Latin, and it describes a movement forwards. And that is why the word emotion is very important. We try to frame eco-anxiety as a positive emotion that should help us find our direction. According to our research, we've seen that eco-anxiety results in behaviors that favor the environment, and these behaviors include activism and adopting a vegan diet. So all behaviors which favor the well-being of nature and the environment. As a result, these behaviors reduce eco-anxiety. Therefore, if I suffer from eco-anxiety and I'm very well aware of the state of affairs, I will suffer from eco-anxiety. If I adopt green behaviors, my eco-anxiety will reduce. Now, there is a problem. This mechanism can lead us to eco-paralysis. What is eco-paralysis? Eco-paralysis is when we suffer from eco-anxiety, but we can't adopt these green behaviors. And why is that? Because we are blocked by the inefficiency of the institutions and bodies that are supposed to make a change, and so we feel abandoned in our fight. There are many activists that come to me and who suffer from eco-paralysis because they feel as though they are not useful any longer. We are increasing the scale of our model, and what our model has proved is that self-efficacy is very important. Self-efficacy means being capable of adequately managing stressful and challenging situations in order to achieve expected results. When self-efficacy is impacted and is hit, what happens is that the amount of eco-sustainable behaviors drops, and this plunges people into eco-paralysis. Our model has a specific aim, and its aim is that of helping people to feel as self-sufficient as possible 24/7. I know I don't have a lot of time, and therefore I will try to be brief. And the voice of the other people is also important. But let me say that self-efficacy and its stimulation is important. Indeed, if we stimulate self-efficacy, we will help people keep on adopting these eco-sustainable behaviors. We should reflect on this. And we should understand how the media communicates about climate change. Because more often than not, the media tends to shove all of the responsibility on activists. And due to all of this pressure, they feel alone, paralyzed. Eco-anxiety, as was said before, is a natural response when facing climate change. And in the same vein, we should see eco-sustainable changes as a small piece of a giant puzzle. So if everyone moves forward in the right direction, this will create the right drive, creating collective self-efficacy. And this will ensure that we do not feel as the only ones to shoulder this burden. Now, burden sharing is very important.
I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to cut you off there. But I love this idea of all of us being this small piece of a greater jigsaw, and how we can see our self-efficacy and our agency as being this smaller piece and contributing to the wider movement. Thank you so much. Sorry to cut you off, but there will be a chance to come back for a second round of short spotlights. So I'm going to move now to our next spotlight speaker, Kira Hoffman. You have 3 minutes. You are the representative of the group Letzte Generation in Germany, and you've been doing some brilliant work. We're really excited to hear what you have to say. Kira.
Yeah, thank you that I can be here today. I didn't know there were translators, so I made some notes in English. But anyways, today I'm representing the movement Letzte Generation, a climate justice movement in Germany. And when I was younger, I would never have thought that I would become an activist one day. But here I am, and it's interesting when I ask myself how I got there. First thing I remember is a moment when someone told me that millions of people are forced to leave their homes due to climate change. And in that moment, something kind of broke inside my heart because I thought about my home and my safe space, my childhood, and I would never want to lose that. So I was devastated when I heard from many people this is already reality. And I feel connected to these people around the world suffering already, because they are like yeah, my sisters and brothers as well. So that's when I knew I have to become active. And I started with going vegan, signed petitions, went to demonstrations, and worked in climate-related fields. But all this seemed to be really slow, as I knew, according to the IPCC report, we have like 3 years to prevent climate tipping points from now. So I started with civil disobedience, first with Extinction Rebellion, and I wanted to interrupt the business as usual and tell everyone that we are in the middle of a catastrophe and we need to make huge changes right now. And then during COVID, when we couldn't protest anymore, with some others, I started a regional climate assembly where I study in the south of Germany. And last year, 90 people from different parts of society came together in this assembly and developed recommendations for politics on how the region can become 100% renewable. And this was a massive process for me. I learned so much, above all, that it's time to bring different social groups together. And that's what I love to do as well. But on the other hand, I still feel and felt that we need to act way faster. So after COVID, I started to protest again with the movement Letzte Generation. And yeah, I want to share with you how it is like when I'm doing civil disobedience, when I walk onto the street where I will sit down and glue myself to the street. I'm really nervous, but also determined, because in that moment, I realize why I'm doing it. I see the faces of like malnourished children in front of me that suffer from droughts. I see the floods that run over an entire city, and I feel terrible to prevent people from passing through. I don't like this feeling, but still it feels right to be there, because all I want to do is to make the crisis visible, because it's not visible for a lot of people, especially in the global north. And we just keep on going what we do. So I want more people to realize that we have to do more. And I asked myself, like, what if we become 10,000s, 100,000 of people on the streets and fight for the same goal? We would have so much power and could really make a change. And right now, we as Letzte Generation, we are trying to network with many stakeholders, such as churches, unions, politicians, and so on, to try to move towards this goal of building alliances. That really gives me hope. And another thing, and last thing that I want to share with you is, something that's probably not visible. It's like the way we treat each other inside the movement. And I want to share this example with you that even if it's really, really hard, we try to like connect to each other in a close way. So after a protest, sometimes you're taken to the police station, you are alone at this point, but you go inside with the certainty of knowing when you get out of it again, someone is waiting for you. No matter if it's in the middle of the night, someone is there standing outside the police station, welcoming you with a warm tea and a big hug. And I find that so beautiful. And this feeling of caring for each other in the movement gives me strength. And I think it's time right now to create ways of also turning this outward through alliances, so that we multiply the hope that is in the movement, but we need to make it more visible and create visions as well. And that's something that I want to share with you in the second round.
Thank you so much, Kira. That was so inspiring. It was so great to hear about how you feel empowered when you're taking these actions, and the warmth and the safety and security that you feel in the solidarity with everybody else who's joined you within the wider group and the wider movement. That's really great. Our next spotlight is from Louis Fidel, who is founding member of HEC, École des Hautes Études Commerce Paris, Transition, and former president of HEC's Ecology Society. Over to you, Louis.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Beaucoup de choses très intéressantes ont été.
Good evening. A number of very interesting things have been said. Let me tell you my own testimony, which is very similar to what we heard. I'm talking to you from a place where activism for climate is not the norm. Business schools. My name is Louis Fidel. I'm 24. I'm studying at HEC, one of the most famous business schools in France. I was not predetermined to become an activist. I was aware of the problem, but not really committed, not really active. And strangely enough, it's at the business school where climate is never mentioned, or hardly ever, that I decided to become active. With a few friends, we understood that our courses, what we get taught is absolutely obsolete. It's 10 or 20 years behind. We want to see the teachers, the professors. We wanted the curriculum to change a little bit, to be adapted. What we asked for was not revolutionary. We didn't want business schools to close down or do things entirely differently. And if what we had suggested had been applied, it would have remained that. But even that was too much for the business school. And that's the starting point for me. That was the trigger. I became very active, but I did not become eco-anxious. I became extremely angry. I'm eco-angry today because of this fatigue which others seem to have about the climate. And we tend to be very offensive and very vocal. We do believe today that nothing will change unless we force it to. And if we ask kindly, nothing will happen. So you need to be present in meetings with the administration, with the professors. You need to bring in proposals, but at the same time, you need to talk to the press. You need to be on social networks. You need to organize sit-ins and happenings. There was a happening a few days ago. We were very happy to have the climate vice president of Total Energy, the big oil company in France, and we gave her a prize during a press conference of Total, the company. They had a press conference, and we barged in. We gave them a prize using humor to make it visible. We do believe that it's important to avoid greenwashing and to say that we do not believe it, quite simply. And since, this came from HEC business school students, it got picked up by the press. Nobody believed that we would be doing such a thing. And of course, the fact that the public believes that you can't be an activist if you're a business school student goes to show what the problem is. It's really entrenched. We are entrenched in attitudes. We tend to be decried as bourgeois students, and either you're pigeonholed, you're a business school student, and that's what you do, and you shut up and you follow the movement, or you're an activist and you do things differently. But we do believe that it's an error to put things into such a stark perspective. It's important to cross it over. And of course, not all HEC business school students will do the same. But we do believe that our symbolic weight, simply because of where we come from, is out of proportion. The press gave us a lot of attention because we were business school students. The attention we got, the symbolic capital we got, is something we need to use in order to ram home a number of messages. It's important. It's going to give strength to a number of friends and to rally around many more people to our cause. And it's important that we can do things differently and teach business students differently. And this doing differently is something which we would like to do in as genuine and happy way as possible. It's important to make transition appealing. That's the problem with ecology today. It's important to make it sexy. It's important to hype it up, to make it attractive. Transition needs to be attractive so that this admiration we have for some new things moves towards new figureheads, which are critical of the current system. This is what we try to do today.
Thank you so much. Sorry to have to cut you off. There's going to be a second round of spotlights. We're really running out of time, so I'm going to go very quickly now back to Matteo. Matteo, if you have anything that you want to respond to what's already been said or to deepen your perspective, please do go ahead now for briefly in a few minutes. I think actually Matteo has left us. So Kira, I'll move over to you.
Okay, thank you. I think what Caroline Hickman said in the beginning really resonated with me. Stop the translator now, I hear the Okay, so what Caroline Hickman said in the beginning, that resonated with me when she said, it's good that you care about the world, don't suppress this feeling, it's healthy. And I want to add to this that I got so much more hope when I finally canalized my anxiety into action, either through protesting or through initiating the Citizens Assembly. And a big shout out at this point to citizens' assemblies in which randomly selected people do politics together. This format gives me so much hope because it's proclaiming a positive image of humanity. It believes civil society has the power to make socially just changes. And after initiating a citizen assembly myself, it felt right to go to Letzte Generation for me, because this movement also calls upon the government to introduce a citizens' assembly at the national level. And this assembly could create the path to a future we actually want economically and culturally. So within Letzte Generation, we are actually working very strongly right now on creating a new vision for the Citizens' Assembly and with bringing people together. So as a sum up, I think there are 3 steps that would really help us now, I think, and could also help in reaching out to the flexible middle that Sven Hillenkamp was talking about. First of all, speaking up and telling the truth. I think we still need to say out loud that we are in the middle of a climate catastrophe. But second of all, we also need to realize and communicate that every fraction of degree of less global warming, no matter how small, makes a big difference and can save many lives as well. And there's no black and white in this matter. Every step counts. And the third part, and I think it's the most important one, is that we need to envision on how we want to live, how beautiful this world could be, and that it's worth to save it. And we need to be brave and let no one tell us that we are naive in having visions and fighting for them. Because I think only when we have a vision on what is desirable, we can work towards this vision. And then finally, we can canalize this feeling of powerlessness into hope and actually make a change.
Thank you so much, Kira. Very, very inspiring. And as promised, Louis, we can come back to you now for another quick 2-minute spotlight.
Oui, alors c'était juste pour conclure.
Yes, thank you. Well, I simply wanted to conclude and maybe pick up on what Kira said. Beyond the rational arguments which we need to make, what seems to be working, if I try to convince my fellow students, for instance, in my business school, of course, we still have today a minority of people who are totally opposed to our ideas, and they will never be convinced, but that's okay. But there is a soft middle, and the soft middle is actually sitting on the fence, and they need to be convinced. And they understand about the issue, they believe it's real, but moving on to action is something that they cannot do yet. And we need to reach out to them in order to show that it's important to take action today, but that it's also a source of joy. It's going to open up new vistas. It's going to make your life more interesting than simply, doing things the way they've been done traditionally. And it's important to transform anger into happiness and a drive for action using humor. Is something which we do a lot, and it works well in France. We have quite a number of offensive movements. Soulèvement de la Terre is actually a movement which got terminated by a government order a few days ago, but it's quite radical in terms of its messaging, but also of its modes of action. But it's important to work on the cultural level, to attract people, to get to meet people, to get them in, and that anger is something which can be transformed into action, and we need to be happy to take the fight.
Thank you so much, Louis. Again, brilliant, inspiring words. And it's so important, obviously, to be changing the curriculum and educating people about what's really happening with the climate crisis and how we can combine to change things. So now we have a chance to come back to our original keynote speakers very quickly, just for 2 minutes. So Caroline, if there's anything that you'd like to respond to what's been said today or to add to what you've already said, please do go ahead.
Thank you. I loved everybody's contributions. They've been very different. I am going to comment about the binary split between optimism and pessimism, because that's what I've heard happening a lot, is the kind of discussion about the need to be positive. And yes, but there are different routes to positivity. And if we fall into this binary split of, oh, we can save everything, everything has to be positive, we have to be very careful, because we will invoke the opposite, which is it's all hopeless, doom and gloom, nihilism. What's the point? We have to be careful about this bouncing between the two. Ironically, they're both the ego trying to get back in control. Humans are feeling very vulnerable and very out of control in this whole situation. So we have to be careful with this ego. We actually have to hold the tension psychologically between these positive, negative positions. It's a false binary. What we need in the center is radical hope. We may be going off a cliff, but we're going down fighting. And that will save our soul. That will save our community. That will save our capacity to empathize and care and make space for the despair, the hopelessness. Hopelessness, ironically, can sometimes save us because there's nothing to be ashamed of. Children around the world in the Maldives say things to me like, you know, climate change is like Thanos in the Avengers Endgame, whose ideology is to kill off half the universe so the other half can thrive. We are the half being killed off. So and I'm not assuming everybody here is from the West, but we have to be able to tolerate that distraction and despair and integrate that into positive action, because that is what we need to be able to do to build sustainable resilience, sustainable activism. And we can do that so long as we cry and laugh and fight and sometimes just say, I'm stuck. And then you get back up and you try again. So I just wanted to make another slight bid for the depression is really healthy. Otherwise, we're falling into the Western medical model. And that's what's got us into this mess in the first place. We need to grow down as well as up.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And I have to say, for me personally, as someone who has been feeling quite depressed over the last few years about the climate crisis after a period of intense activism, it's really, really wholesome to hear what you're saying about accepting that depressed feeling and feeling also that it's a time that I can nurture and grow and hopefully return to some more slower but still powerful activism. And with that said, we also now have 2 minutes for you, Sven, to come back and react a bit to what we've already heard. Over to you, Sven.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich fand es auch sehr interessant, was ihr anderen
thank you very much.
alles gesagt habt. Oh, ich muss mal gerade meine Übersetzung hier ausschalten. Ich höre mich selber übersetzt.
Switching off the translation.
Ja, was mir noch eingefallen ist,
there's something else I was thinking of. There were two different approaches, you know, how to win over majorities, how to win elections. So there's one point, which is that's the national coalition approach, or Obama coalition approach. You might have heard about that. So that's what Obama did. He reached out and managed to reach the flexible middle in society by turning radicalization down. And this is something that we should strive for. Also, when it comes to Letzte Generation, studies show that these actions are counterproductive. Listen to the science. So there's hope for that. They look at this approach. Turnout approach, that's another approach. Energize the base approach. This is what, unfortunately, with success, is something that Donald Trump did. He polarized everybody. He never even bothered to reach out to the middle strata. He just went from one attack to the next, to a counteroffensive. And this is something that Greta Thunberg was very good at initially. When she started at global level, she embodied this attack. It might be a contradiction. Get smarter is what you could call it. Get smarter, get harder. Get smarter in the sense of a coalition approach to avoid backlash, but also grow harder in the sense that people who now feel powerless. The reason here is that there's too many people who embody attack, the fight. Robert Habeck, the German minister, is a good example. He apologizes for errors, for mistakes, and he explains things in a very quiet manner, not very upset. It's okay, but it's not enough, because the base needs energy. They need to be energized. This is only possible with a counter-offensive, counter-attack. And this element needs to grow. So not just think about the political adversary, but also think about those who are already convinced, but they need to be fed energy. They need an input. This is only possible with a counter-attack, and this element needs to grow, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sven, for this concept of the flexible middle and the growing of the energy and the counterattack. It's all really, really great food for thought. I know so many of you here today have things to say, you have questions, and that's why we have a second event next week coming up, which is dedicated completely to audience participation. We don't have panel speakers, it's all for you. It's a sharing space where we will have small breakout rooms, so everybody gets a space to share and empower and grow. So the next event is next week, same time, 8 to 10 p.m. Online on Zoom, and it will be in English, but we will have multi-language subtitles, so you can use the interpretation features on Zoom to talk to each other across borders in this transnational space. And in this second event, we want to create a democratic, transnational space for people to share their emotions and personal experiences, to empower each other and to grow together. So our special guests will be all of you. We really want all of you who are here today, who've listened to the speeches, who've listened to the different groups and voices and perspectives, to have a chance to think about what was said, to reflect and to come forward with your own ideas, your own experiences, and your own reflections and responses. And some of the speakers who are here today will definitely be joining us next week as well to take part in the conversation. So do come along next week, 29th June, 8 to 10 p.m. to share your experiences, to share the empowerment to action with people from all over Europe. And if you want to join that event, we will be circulating the registration link after this event today. So do stay tuned. It was wonderful to hear from all of our speakers. Thank you everyone who's joined, and I really hope to see you all again next week. Max, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. If not.
Well, thank you very much from my side. Thanks, everybody. Max, kindly thanking our interpreters. We're very happy to work for you. Great work. Fantastic. Thank you for listening. Thanks, everybody. And as Sima said, see you again next Thursday. And then we'll have plenty of time for discussion. I think there's plenty of stuff, plenty of food for thought and discussion. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Goodbye.